Humans have more food than any species in history, more comfort, more medicine, more knowledge about the body than ever before. Yet the human body still breaks down with surprising ease. Joints wear out, metabolism collapses, sleep fails to restore what daily life consumes. If excess is the cause, why did bodies deteriorate long before abundance existed? If modern life is the problem, why does decline follow even when people live carefully? The uncomfortable possibility is this: the human body is not failing because the world changed. It is failing because it was never designed for longevity at all. The human body feels fragile not because something has gone wrong recently, but because fragility has always been built into it. What appears to be decline is often just delayed exposure. Modern life does not invent weakness. It reveals it. The body most people live in today is the result of countless short-term solutions stacked on top of one another. Each solution solved an immediate survival problem. None were required to remain stable across an entire lifetime. The result is a system that functions impressively for a while, then quietly begins to unravel. Evolution never asked the body to last. It only asked it to work long enough. For most of human history, life was brief. Injury, infection, and starvation removed individuals long before slow structural failures became visible. Under those conditions, a body that performed well for a few decades was more than sufficient. There was no evolutionary advantage to refining joints that would still function perfectly at 80, or organs that could maintain peak efficiency indefinitely. This explains why the body often begins to fail even when no obvious mistake has been made. Decline does not require abuse. It requires time. And time exposes compromises that were always present. The skeleton is a clear example. Human bones are strong relative to body weight, but they are not reinforced for permanence. They remodel constantly, trading density for flexibility, strength for lightness. This balance works well early in life, when speed and endurance matter most. Over time, however, microscopic losses accumulate. The structure weakens not because of neglect, but because it was never optimized to resist decades of repetitive stress. The same logic applies to joints. They allow remarkable mobility, but rely on soft tissues that degrade with use. Cartilage has limited capacity for regeneration. Once worn, it is replaced imperfectly, if at all. Pain is not a malfunction. It is the signal of a system reaching the edge of what it was designed to tolerate. These failures are not random. They are predictable outcomes of a temporary design. Internal systems follow the same pattern. Metabolism evolved to prioritize energy storage, not balance. In an environment where food was unpredictable, storing excess calories increased survival. Precision was unnecessary. Efficiency mattered more than long-term regulation. In a modern environment of constant availability, this same system strains under conditions it was never shaped to handle. When energy intake exceeds what the system expects, regulatory mechanisms begin to distort. Hormonal signals lose clarity. Storage expands beyond safe limits. Inflammation increases. These effects are often blamed on behavior, but behavior alone does not explain why the system responds so poorly. The deeper cause is structural mismatch. Again, the body is not malfunctioning. It is operating exactly as designed, just in the wrong context. The immune system reveals another layer of the same problem. It evolved to respond aggressively to threats, because hesitation carried lethal consequences. Overreaction was safer than precision. In a short lifespan, this strategy saved lives. Over decades, however, constant activation damages tissues, increases error, and turns defense into self-attack. Autoimmune conditions and chronic inflammation are not modern inventions. They are long-term costs of a system that was never required to maintain balance indefinitely. Repair mechanisms offer no escape from this pattern. Healing is effective but imperfect. Tissues are replaced with substitutes rather than originals. Cellular replication introduces small errors that accumulate slowly. Each repair restores function, but rarely restores the system to its previous state. Over time, the body becomes a collection of patches rather than a cohesive whole. This gradual degradation is often labeled as aging. But aging is not a single process. It is the visible outcome of a body that was never meant to preserve itself forever. Decline is not an enemy invading the system. It is the system revealing its limits. Lifestyle choices can reduce stress on this architecture, but they cannot redesign it. Exercise strengthens muscles, but joints still wear. Nutrition supports function, but metabolism still slows. Sleep restores some damage, but never all of it. These interventions delay breakdown. They do not prevent it. This returns the focus to the central question. The human body breaks down easily, not because people live incorrectly, but because the body itself is temporary by nature. It was assembled for survival, not longevity. Modern life simply allows people to live long enough to experience the consequences. The breakdown feels sudden only because it was postponed. And once this is understood, the fragility of the human body no longer feels mysterious. It feels inevitable. The sense of inevitability deepens when the nervous system is examined, because it reveals how deeply short-term survival shaped everything else. The brain and nerves evolved to prioritize immediate response over long-term preservation. Speed mattered more than efficiency. Alertness mattered more than recovery. A nervous system that hesitated died. A nervous system that stayed active survived, even if that activity slowly damaged the body hosting it. This is why stress feels so destructive over time. Stress is not a malfunction. It is the nervous system doing exactly what it evolved to do. Mobilize resources quickly, repeatedly, and without concern for cumulative cost. In a short life filled with acute danger, this made sense. In a long life filled with constant low-level stimulation, the same mechanism never fully disengages. Hormones remain elevated, muscles stay tense. Sleep becomes shallow, repair processes lose priority. The body begins paying interest on a system that was never meant to run continuously. Here again, the cause is not modern weakness or poor discipline, it is architectural. The nervous system was never designed to operate calmly for decades. It was designed to spike, resolve, and reset. When reset never fully happens, breakdown accelerates. This explains why sleep, despite its importance, cannot fully reverse decline. Sleep evolved as a maintenance window, not a full restoration cycle. It reduces damage. It does not erase it. During sleep, the body reallocates limited resources to essential repair, but those resources are finite. When damage accumulates faster than it can be corrected, sleep becomes insufficient. The system remains behind, night after night, quietly losing ground. This returns again to the core question. Why does the body break down so easily? Because every major system was tuned to operate under scarcity, danger, and brevity. None were optimized for prolonged balance. Even the way cells divide reflects this limitation. Cellular replication prioritizes speed over perfection. Errors are tolerated as long as they do not interfere with immediate function. Over time, those errors accumulate. DNA damage increases. Cellular communication weakens. Some cells stop dividing entirely. Others divide uncontrollably. This is not a sudden failure. It is the predictable outcome of a process that values continuation over accuracy. If the body had been designed to last, redundancy would be greater. But those features require energy, time, and evolutionary pressure that never existed. They were unnecessary in a world where few lived long enough to benefit from them. This is why comparing humans to other animals can be misleading. Some species appear to age more slowly or regenerate more effectively, but they evolved under different constraints. Their environments rewarded longevity or regeneration in ways the human environment never did. Humans evolved for flexibility, intelligence, and adaptability, not durability. Those traits came with costs that only become visible when life extends beyond its original design window. Modern medicine often gives the impression that decline is optional, that with enough intervention the body can be maintained indefinitely. But most medical advances work by compensating for failure, not preventing it. They support systems that are already faltering. They extend function. They do not change the underlying design. The body continues to age, only more slowly, and often with greater complexity of failure. This is why interventions accumulate rather than replace one another. Medications stack, treatments multiply. Each one addresses a specific weakness, but none eliminate the pattern. The body remains a system of compromises held together by external support. At this point, the central idea becomes difficult to avoid. The human body does not break down because it is poorly cared for. It breaks down because it is honest about what it is. A temporary structure optimized for a different era, now stretched far beyond the conditions it was shaped to endure. When people feel betrayed by their bodies, what they are often experiencing is not malfunction, but revelation. The revelation that comfort does not equal compatibility. That longevity exposes limits rather than erasing them. That survival and durability are not the same goal. Every ache, every loss of resilience, every gradual decline traces back to this single origin. A body assembled for immediacy, now asked to persist. A system designed to respond, now forced to maintain. A structure that worked remarkably well, just not forever. And once that is understood, the question shifts again. Not how to stop the body from breaking down, but how long it can be held together before its original design finally asserts itself. That tension between temporary architecture and extended lifespan is where the rest of this story unfolds. That tension becomes most visible when the body is forced to maintain balance rather than respond to crisis. Balance was never the primary objective. Survival was. The systems that keep the body alive were built to handle extremes, not to hover gently within narrow limits, year after year. When extremes disappear and stability becomes the goal, hormonal regulation illustrates this clearly. Hormones evolved to surge, trigger action, and then fade. They were signals for urgency, not for steady management. In a long, stable life, these surges happen too often and resolve too slowly. Over time, signaling becomes noisy. Feedback loops lose precision. The body stops knowing exactly when to activate and when to rest. Fatigue, mood instability, and metabolic slowdown are not mysterious outcomes. They are the predictable result of a signaling system stretched beyond its intended role. This is another return to the same cause. The body breaks down easily because regulation was never meant to be continuous. It was meant to be situational. When situations never truly end, regulation turns into strain. The cardiovascular system follows the same logic. The heart is powerful and adaptable, but it was shaped to handle bursts of effort separated by recovery. Over decades of constant demand, even moderate demand, the system remodels itself in ways that reduce flexibility. The heart compensates by working harder. None of this is sudden. It unfolds slowly, invisibly, until symptoms finally appear. What looks like failure late in life is often adaptation that has reached its limit. Again, the cause is not excess or neglect alone, it is duration. The longer the system runs, the more its original trade-offs are exposed. Muscle tissue provides a similar lesson. Muscle adapts quickly to use and disuse, which was advantageous in an unpredictable environment. But this adaptability comes at a cost. Maintaining muscle requires constant signaling and energy. When signals weaken with age and energy allocation shifts, muscle loss accelerates. This is not because the body forgets how to maintain itself. It is because maintaining muscle indefinitely was never a priority encoded into the system. The same applies to connective tissue, tendons, and ligaments. They heal slowly by design. Speed was sacrificed for strength, and regeneration was limited because long-term repair was rarely needed. In a short lifespan, slow healing was acceptable. In a long one, it becomes a source of chronic limitation. Every time the body is asked to sustain rather than survive, the same weakness appears. It can cope, but it cannot preserve itself perfectly. This perspective changes how decline is understood. Decline is not a cascade of independent failures. It is a single story repeating across different systems. Temporary solutions performing beyond their expected lifespan. Short-term optimizations revealing long-term costs. Even cognition reflects this pattern. The brain prioritizes learning, adaptation, and rapid response. It consumes enormous energy to do so. Over time, maintaining this level of activity becomes harder. Neural repair is limited. Waste removal is efficient but not complete. Small disruptions accumulate. Memory slows. Focus fragments. This is not because the brain is fragile. It is because it was never designed to operate at peak capacity indefinitely. Once again, the explanation loops back. The body breaks down easily because ease was never promised. Function was, and only for as long as it was necessary. This is why searching for a single cause often fails. There is no single toxin, habit, or mistake responsible for human decline. There is a pattern rooted in a body built to respond to urgency, now living in duration, built to adapt quickly, now asked to remain stable, built to pass on genes, now expected to preserve itself. As this mismatch persists, the body does not collapse all at once. It compromises, it prioritizes, it lets some systems weaken to keep others running. Pain replaces performance. Efficiency replaces resilience. This is not malfunction. It is triage. And triage is what a system does when it was never meant to last this long. Understanding this does not stop the process, but it clarifies it. It removes the illusion that perfect care guarantees permanence. It explains why even the most carefully maintained bodies eventually show the same signs of unraveling. Different timelines, similar outcomes. The human body breaks down easily because it is honest about its origins. A structure shaped by necessity, not foresight. Extended by circumstance, not redesign. Asked to endure far longer than it was ever required to. And as long as that remains true, every attempt to preserve it will be an effort to slow exposure, not to erase the limits that were present from the very beginning. Those limits become unavoidable when the body is asked not just to function, but to function continuously. Continuity was never guaranteed. Every system assumes interruption, recovery, and eventual replacement. When replacement does not happen, and interruption never truly arrives, decline becomes structural rather than accidental. Energy allocation exposes this clearly. The body operates on constant trade-offs. Energy sent to one system is energy denied to another. In early life, energy flows toward growth, repair, and reproduction. Repair loses priority. Maintenance becomes selective. Some systems are preserved at the expense of others. This is why decline rarely feels uniform. Vision fades while hearing remains. Strength drops while endurance persists. The body is not failing randomly. It is redistributing limited resources according to ancient priorities. This returns again to the same origin. The body breaks down easily because it was never required to protect everything equally. It was required to protect what mattered immediately. This selective preservation becomes more pronounced with time. The body chooses survival over quality. Basic function over performance. Staying alive over staying intact. Pain, stiffness, and reduced capacity are the cost of those choices. They are not errors in judgment. They are the judgment. The idea that the body should remain stable indefinitely is a modern expectation placed on an ancient structure. That expectation creates frustration because it contradicts how the system was shaped. The body does not resist decline because decline is not an external threat. It is the final stage of a process that began at assembly. This is why no single improvement changes the outcome. Better nutrition improves efficiency, but does not remove trade-offs. Exercise enhances capacity, but increases wear. Medical intervention delays failure, but adds complexity. Each solution works locally, while the global pattern continues unchanged. The pattern is simple, even if its effects are not. A body built for short horizons, now living in long ones. When decline accelerates later in life, it often feels sudden, but it is not. What changes is visibility. Early in life, redundancy hides weakness. Compensation masks loss. As those buffers thin, limits surface. What appears as rapid breakdown is often the final exposure of compromises made long ago. This exposure is why decline feels personal, even unfair. People experience it as betrayal because the body worked so well before. But the earlier years were not proof of permanence. They were proof of timing. The system was operating within the window it was shaped for. Once outside that window, the same design that enabled survival becomes the reason for fragility. This reframes the entire question once more. The human body does not break down because modern life is hostile. Modern life is simply long. It gives the body time to reach the edge of what it was always capable of sustaining. Longevity is not free. It reveals costs that short lives never paid, and that is why the body breaks down easily. Not because it is weak, but because it is finite. Not because it was neglected, but because it was never promised to endure. Not because something went wrong, but because nothing was ever meant to go on unchanged. As long as the body remains what it has always been, an adaptive, temporary structure, breakdown is not a possibility waiting to happen. It is a certainty unfolding at a speed that only seems surprising when its origin is forgotten. That certainty is not dramatic. It is gradual, quiet, and consistent. And it explains why every attempt to outrun decline eventually slows, then stops. The system was never meant to win against time. It was meant to function within it, briefly, efficiently, and then give way. This is the reality beneath every ache, every loss of resilience, every subtle failure that accumulates unnoticed until it can no longer be ignored. A body doing exactly what it was shaped to do, even as expectations ask it to be something else. This mismatch between expectation and design becomes most obvious when people try to preserve the body rather than simply use it. Preservation assumes that the system can be stabilized. The body, however, was never built to remain stable. It was built to adjust, compensate, and move on. Adjustment works well in the short term. Over the long term, it creates imbalance. Homeostasis is often described as balance, but in the human body it is closer to controlled instability. Systems are constantly shifting, overshooting, correcting, and overshooting again. This oscillation is not a flaw. It allowed rapid adaptation to changing conditions. But oscillation also creates wear. The more often systems are pushed and pulled, the more strain accumulates in the structures that hold them together. This is why chronic conditions are so common in long-lived humans. Chronic does not mean extreme. It means persistent. A low level of dysfunction maintained over decades is far more damaging than a short period of acute stress. The body evolved to survive spikes, not plateaus. When stress becomes constant, even if mild, the system never fully resets. Repair becomes partial. Compensation becomes permanent. Once again, the cause is not moral failure or poor choices. It is duration. The body is enduring conditions it was never selected to endure for this long. This also explains why many declines appear to accelerate together. As one system weakens, others compensate. That compensation increases their workload. Over time, the compensating systems weaken as well. What looks like cascading failure is often a series of adaptations reaching their limits simultaneously. The body is not collapsing. It is exhausting its options. This exhaustion is especially clear in connective systems that tie everything together. Fascia, cartilage, vascular tissue, and neural pathways all rely on integrity over time. They are not designed for repeated reconstruction. Once integrity diminishes, function follows. Movement becomes inefficient. Signals slow. Circulation adapts by narrowing options. The body becomes less flexible not because it forgets how to be flexible, but because flexibility requires structural margin that has been gradually spent. Margin is a critical concept here. Early in life, the body has margin, excess capacity, redundancy, tolerance for error. As time passes, margin is consumed. Each injury, illness, repair, and adaptation uses some of it. The body continues to function, but with less room for deviation. Eventually, even small disruptions produce noticeable effects. This is when decline becomes visible. This visibility is often misinterpreted as sudden aging. The body kept working by borrowing from the future. Even the sensory systems reveal this pattern. Vision relies on delicate structures that degrade slowly with exposure and use. Hearing depends on cells that do not regenerate once damaged. Touch and proprioception lose precision as neural pathways thin. None of these losses are dramatic at first. They accumulate quietly until clarity fades. The body does not panic. It adapts by simplifying input. Less information, fewer corrections, lower resolution. Simplification is another survival strategy. When complexity becomes too costly, the system reduces it. This keeps basic function intact, but sacrifices richness. Life becomes narrower not because the mind chooses it, but because the body can no longer support the same level of detail. This narrowing is not limited to sensation. It appears in physical capacity, recovery speed, and tolerance for stress. The body becomes conservative. It avoids extremes. It limits output to prevent catastrophic failure. What feels like weakness is often restraint. Restraint is the final stage of a system managing its own decline. Understanding this reframes how effort interacts with aging. Effort does not stop decline. It negotiates with it. It decides where decline will be slower and where it will be faster. Training strengthens some systems while accelerating wear in others. Rest preserves some capacities while allowing others to fade. There is no neutral choice. Every choice redistributes decline. This is why different people experience different failures. The pattern is the same, but the expression varies. One body sacrifices joints to preserve strength. Another sacrifices endurance to preserve mobility. Another preserves cognition at the cost of physical resilience. The body is not unfair. It is strategic, and strategy implies limits. The idea that decline should be optional is a cultural belief, not a biological one. Biology never promised optionality. It promised sufficiency. Once enough is exceeded, the system does not expand its promise. It enforces its boundaries. These boundaries are not cruel. They are consistent. This consistency explains why no era escapes the same outcome. Ancient humans declined quickly. Modern humans decline slowly. But the direction is identical. The timeline stretches. The architecture does not change. Longevity magnifies weakness rather than eliminating it. This brings the focus back, once more, to the central question. Why does the human body break down so easily? Because ease is relative to expectation. Compared to what the body was built for, it lasts remarkably long. Compared to what modern life demands, it is fragile. The body is caught between two worlds, one that shaped it and one that extends it. As long as that tension exists, breakdown is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of honesty. The system is revealing what it always was. Temporary, adaptive, and limited, not defective, not lazy, simply finite. And that finitude is not hidden in rare diseases or extreme conditions. It is present in every ordinary ache, every slower recovery, every adaptation that trades quality for continuity. The body does not betray expectations. Expectations betray the body's origins. Once this is understood, the story of decline becomes clearer. It is not a mystery to solve, but a structure to recognize. A structure that explains why preservation always requires effort, why effort never fully succeeds, and why time ultimately exposes what design never intended to conceal. The human body breaks down easily because it was never meant to resist time. It was meant to pass through it. That passage through time becomes most evident when the body is no longer judged by survival, but by comfort. Survival sets a low threshold. Comfort sets a high one. A body that survives pain, limitation, and inefficiency is still a successful biological system. A body expected to remain comfortable, capable, and predictable for decades is being judged by a standard it was never built to meet. This difference explains much of the modern confusion around decline. When discomfort appears, it is interpreted as malfunction. When performance drops, it is seen as failure. But from the body's perspective, these signals are not errors. They are adjustments. They mark a shift from expansion to conservation. The system is not collapsing. It is narrowing its focus to maintain continuity. Continuity, not quality, has always been the priority. This is why pain becomes more common with time. Pain is often described as damage, but more accurately, it is communication. It tells the system where margin has thinned. It signals where structures are operating closer to their limits. In a short life, pain often meant injury or imminent threat. In a long life, pain often means sustained load on a design that never planned for endurance. The message is the same. The context has changed. The body responds to this message by altering behavior. Movement becomes cautious. Output decreases. Recovery slows. These changes feel restrictive because they are. They restrict use to preserve function. The body chooses less over none. Once again, the cause returns to the same origin. A system optimized for immediate survival, now managing prolonged existence. The digestive system reflects this tension clearly. It evolved to extract energy efficiently from unpredictable inputs. It was not designed to regulate constant intake with precision. Over time, regulation becomes noisy, absorption changes, sensitivity shifts. The gut adapts by simplifying digestion, often at the cost of tolerance. What is labeled as intolerance or sensitivity is frequently the system narrowing acceptable inputs to reduce internal strain. This narrowing mirrors what happens elsewhere. The body reduces options as margin disappears. Fewer foods feel comfortable. Fewer movements feel safe. Fewer stressors can be absorbed without consequence. The world does not become harsher. The system becomes more selective. Selectivity is another form of adaptation, not evidence of failure. The same principle applies to recovery. Recovery is often assumed to restore the body to its previous state. In reality, recovery restores function, not structure. The body does not rebuild itself as new. It patches, reinforces, and adjusts. Each cycle of recovery leaves subtle changes behind. Over time, these changes accumulate. The body becomes functional, but altered, capable, but constrained. This accumulation explains why decline is uneven. Some capacities remain surprisingly strong, while others fade early. The body preserves what it relies on most. It abandons what it can afford to lose. This is not a conscious choice. It is embedded in how energy, repair, and signaling are prioritized. As life extends, these priorities become more visible. They compare themselves to earlier versions of their bodies and feel loss. But from the system's perspective, nothing has been taken away. It has simply been reallocated. Reallocation is not reversible. This irreversibility is another source of discomfort. Modern culture often treats the body as modifiable, as if enough intervention could restore any lost function. But most interventions work by compensating, not reversing. They support weakened systems. They do not recreate original conditions. The body continues forward, not backward. This forward motion is what makes decline feel relentless. Even when progress is made in one area, it often reveals strain in another. Improvements do not stack cleanly. They redistribute load. The system remains finite. Finitude is not pessimism. It is description. Understanding the body as finite clarifies why maintenance requires increasing effort over time. Early in life, the body maintains itself with minimal input. Later, maintenance becomes active work. Exercise must be planned. Diet must be monitored. Rest must be protected. These requirements increase, not because people are doing less, but because the system requires more support to achieve the same output. Support replaces resilience. This replacement marks a fundamental shift. Resilience allows systems to absorb stress and return to baseline. Support allows systems to function despite not returning fully. When resilience fades, support becomes necessary. When support fails, function declines rapidly. This is why decline can appear gradual for years and then accelerate. The system crosses a threshold where support can no longer compensate for lost margin. What was once manageable becomes overwhelming. The pace of change increases not because damage suddenly appears, but because compensation finally runs out. Again, the cause is not sudden failure, it is delayed consequence. Delayed consequence is the defining feature of long-lived bodies. Short-lived systems experience consequences quickly, or not at all. Long-lived systems accumulate them quietly until they surface. This accumulation explains why decline often feels disconnected from cause. People ask why their body feels different now when nothing obvious has changed. The answer is that everything has changed slowly. The cause is not recent. It is cumulative. Cumulative exposure, cumulative repair, cumulative compromise. Every step of this process traces back to the same structural truth. The human body was not built to preserve itself indefinitely. It was built to function long enough, then adapt as needed, then eventually yield. Yielding is not collapse, it is release. The body releases complexity first, then capacity, then redundancy. It sheds what it cannot maintain. This shedding feels like loss, but it is also efficiency. The system simplifies to remain viable. This simplification is why decline often brings clarity alongside limitation. Movements become deliberate. Energy is spent selectively. The body no longer tolerates waste. What remains is what the system deems essential. Essentiality replaces abundance. From a biological perspective, this is success under constraint. The system continues as long as possible with what remains. From a human perspective, it feels like shrinking. Both perspectives are true, and both lead back to the same answer. The human body breaks down easily, not because it is poorly made, but because it was made for a different scale of time. When life extends beyond that scale, breakdown is not evidence of defect. The body reveals its limits because limits were always there. Understanding this does not eliminate decline, but it changes the relationship to it. Decline becomes predictable rather than personal, structural rather than moral, expected rather than shocking. And as long as the human body remains what it has always been, an adaptive, temporary system shaped by necessity, this pattern will repeat. Not because something went wrong, but because nothing about its design ever promised permanence. That honesty becomes hardest to accept when the body's limits interfere with identity. People do not experience decline only as physical change, but as a disruption of who they believe themselves to be. When they fade, the body feels less like a tool and more like a boundary. This reaction is understandable, but it obscures the deeper pattern. Identity was built on capacities that were always temporary. The body did not promise continuity of performance. It offered continuity of function. When function remains but performance declines, the system is still succeeding by its own criteria, even as expectations fall behind. This difference between function and performance is central. Performance peaks early because it is expensive. It requires surplus energy, intact structures, and wide margins. Function persists longer because it is economical. It relies on conservation, prioritization, and simplification. As time passes, the body trades performance for function without hesitation. From the inside, this feels like loss. From the system's perspective, it is efficiency. Efficiency, not excellence, is what allows continuation. This is why many declines feel asymmetrical. One area weakens while another remains stable. One skill fades while another sharpens. The body reallocates resources to what keeps it viable, not to what once defined it. This reallocation can feel arbitrary, but it follows ancient priorities. Maintain circulation, maintain respiration, maintain basic cognition, maintain mobility sufficient for independence. Everything else becomes negotiable. Negotiation is constant. The body negotiates between pain and movement, effort and recovery, clarity and fatigue. These negotiations intensify with time because the terms become stricter. The system no longer has the luxury of excess. Each decision matters more. Each stressor carries greater cost. This cost sensitivity is often mistaken for fragility. In reality, it is a sign that buffers have thinned. Early in life, buffers absorb mistakes. Later, mistakes are felt directly. The body has not become weaker in absolute terms. It has become less insulated. Insulation is another resource that time consumes. The loss of insulation explains why small disruptions feel larger later in life. A missed night of sleep has greater impact. A minor injury takes longer to resolve. A period of stress leaves a deeper mark. The system responds the same way it always has, but without the cushioning that once softened the response. Again, the cause is not recent change. It is accumulated exposure. This accumulation also explains why decline feels non-linear. Long periods of apparent stability are followed by noticeable shifts. The system appears to hold, then suddenly give way. But what gives way is not structure. It is compensation. Once compensation fails, limits surface quickly. This is often the moment when people search for a cause, a diagnosis, a trigger, an explanation that makes the change feel reversible. But the real cause is rarely singular. It is the exhaustion of options. The system has adapted as long as it could. Adaptation, by definition, has an endpoint. The body's ability to adapt is finite because adaptation itself consumes resources. Every adjustment costs energy, complexity, and margin. Early adaptations are cheap. Later ones are expensive. Eventually, the cost exceeds the benefit. At that point, the system stops adapting and starts constraining. Constraint is not failure. It is containment. Containment keeps the system intact by limiting exposure. Movement narrows. Activity becomes selective. Output stabilizes at a lower level. This containment preserves life, but not lifestyle. It ensures continuation. This is where modern expectations clash most strongly with biology. Modern life assumes expansion is always possible. More optimization, more improvement, more control. It assumes trade-offs, ceilings, and eventual limits. When those limits appear, the mismatch becomes personal. People feel they have done something wrong, that they missed a solution. That decline could have been avoided, but avoidance was never guaranteed. Only delay was. Delay has been remarkably successful. Humans live far longer than the bodies they inherited were shaped for. That success, however, comes with consequences. Longevity exposes every compromise that short lives concealed. This exposure is why decline feels like betrayal rather than completion. The body worked long enough for attachment to form. Expectations grew around capacities that were never permanent. When those capacities fade, it feels like loss rather than closure. Yet from the body's perspective, nothing has been taken away prematurely. The system has simply reached the edge of what it was built to sustain. This edge is not uniform. It arrives differently for each system and each individual. But it always arrives. No amount of optimization removes the edge. It only shifts where and how it appears. Understanding this reframes the question one last time. The human body does not break down easily compared to its design. It breaks down easily compared to modern expectation. Those two standards are not aligned. Compared to what evolution required, the body performs extraordinarily well. Compared to what modern life demands, it appears fragile. Both assessments are true, depending on the frame. The body is not outdated. It is unchanged. Modern life extended time without redesigning structure. It asked an ancient system to operate under new rules. The system responded by adapting as far as it could. What remains is not failure, but exposure. Exposure to time. Exposure to accumulation. Exposure to limits that were always present. This exposure explains why the same patterns repeat across cultures, lifestyles, and eras. Different conditions, similar outcomes. The details vary, the structure does not. And that is why the human body breaks down so easily. Not because it is poorly built, but because it is faithfully built to a logic that no longer matches the scale of life it now inhabits. The body has not fallen behind the world. The world has moved beyond the body's original terms. As long as that gap exists, decline will continue to appear as breakdown rather than completion. as disappointment rather than design. But the design has never changed. It has simply been asked to endure far longer than it was ever meant to, and in doing so, it reveals exactly what it has always been: adaptive, temporary, and finite. That finiteness becomes undeniable when the body can no longer hide its compromises behind effort. For much of life, effort masks limitation. Strength compensates for joint wear. Focus compensates for fatigue. Momentum compensates for inefficiency. As long as effort produces results, the illusion of stability holds. When effort begins to cost more than it returns, the illusion dissolves. This is often mistaken for sudden weakness. In reality, it is the point where effort stops being an effective disguise. The underlying structure has not changed abruptly. What has changed is the body's ability to compensate without consequence. Compensation was always temporary. It only appeared permanent because the cost was deferred. Deferred cost is one of the most important ideas in understanding why the human body breaks down so easily. Almost every system in the body borrows from the future to meet present demands. Muscles recruit additional fibers. Hormones amplify signals. The nervous system increases alertness. Repair is postponed. None of these choices are mistakes. They are efficient solutions in a world where the future was uncertain. But when the future reliably arrives, those debts must be paid. Payment does not come as a single event. It comes as reduced tolerance, reduced recovery, reduced margin. The body does not announce this shift clearly. It simply responds differently to the same inputs. What once felt manageable now feels heavy. What once resolved quickly now lingers. The system has reached a stage where borrowing is no longer viable. At this stage, decline feels personal because it coincides with awareness. People notice limits precisely when they can no longer be ignored. But awareness is not the cause. It is the signal that the system has exhausted its strategies. This exhaustion also explains why decline often provokes control-seeking behavior. People try to optimize sleep, diet, movement, supplementation, routine. These efforts can slow decline, but they cannot reverse the underlying direction. Control operates within the system's limits. It does not redefine them. The belief that perfect control can preserve the body indefinitely is appealing because it implies responsibility and agency. But biology does not operate on fairness. It operates on sufficiency. The body does not ask whether decline is deserved. It responds to accumulated conditions. Accumulation is indifferent to intention. This indifference is why two people can live very differently and still encounter similar forms of breakdown. Everyone is subject to the same architectural constraints. Variation exists within those constraints, not outside them. This is also why decline often persists even when causes are removed. Rest improves fatigue but does not restore lost margin. Reduced stress calms the nervous system but does not undo years of elevated activation. Healing addresses damage but leaves traces behind. The body moves forward, carrying everything it has accumulated. Nothing is erased. It is only reorganized. Reorganization becomes the dominant mode of operation later in life. Systems are rearranged to maintain viability with fewer resources. This process is subtle and continuous. It does not announce itself as failure. It presents as adaptation. Slower pace, narrower range, increased selectivity. Selectivity is essential for survival under constraint. The body chooses what to keep and what to let go. It protects core functions and releases secondary ones. Circulation, respiration, and basic cognition are defended longest. Speed, strength, and resilience are negotiable. Comfort is expendable. This prioritization reveals the body's true values. It values continuity over experience, existence over optimization, staying alive over staying capable. When people resist this process, they often frame it as fighting the body. But the body is not the adversary. It is following its oldest logic. The conflict arises from expectations that were never part of that logic. Modern life trains people to expect continuity of experience, to believe that with enough maintenance, the body should behave like a machine designed for uptime. But the body is not a machine. It is a biological system shaped by uncertainty. Its goal was never uptime. It was persistence under risk. Risk has changed, the body has not. This mismatch explains why decline feels like a problem to solve rather than a process to recognize. Solutions imply endpoints. Processes imply acceptance. Modern culture favors solutions. Biology offers processes. The process of breakdown is not chaotic. It follows a pattern. Each phase reflects the same design, operating under different conditions of time and accumulation. Understanding this pattern does not eliminate discomfort, but it contextualizes it. Pain becomes information rather than anomaly. Fatigue becomes signal rather than flaw. Limitation becomes evidence of prioritization rather than defeat. This context matters because it reframes the central question one final time. The human body does not break down easily because it is fragile. It breaks down predictably because it is honest. Honest about what it was built to do and how long it was built to do it. Ease, in this sense, is not about weakness. It is about transparency. The body does not conceal its limits indefinitely. It reveals them gradually. As time accumulates and options narrow, when those limits become visible, it can feel like loss. But loss implies something was taken away unfairly. What is actually happening is completion. Completion does not mean collapse. It means transition. From expansion to conservation. From performance to preservation. From possibility to sufficiency. This transition is often resisted because it contradicts modern narratives of endless improvement. But resistance does not change the structure. It only adds tension to a process that is already underway. The body continues regardless. It adjusts. It simplifies. It holds on where it must and lets go where it can. It does not ask permission. It does not apologize. And in that persistence, it reveals the final truth beneath the entire discussion. The human body breaks down easily only when judged by expectations it never agreed to. Judged by its own terms, it performs exactly as intended. It survives. It endures long enough. What happens after that was never part of the original plan. What follows after that original plan ends is not chaos, but consistency. The body does not suddenly lose direction. It continues following the same logic that guided it from the beginning. The difference is that the margin for choice narrows until only the most essential paths remain. At that point, decline is no longer subtle. It becomes the dominant signal. This stage is often described as the body giving up, but that language is misleading. The body is not surrendering. It is conserving. Conservation is the final strategy of a system that has exhausted expansion. When expansion is no longer possible, preservation becomes selective and strict. Selective preservation explains why energy feels scarce later in life. Energy production has not vanished, but its distribution has changed. Less is allocated to optional functions. More is reserved for baseline operation. Tasks that once felt automatic now require planning and recovery. The body is not weaker. It is more deliberate. Deliberation replaces spontaneity. Spontaneity depends on surplus. It requires the ability to absorb mistakes without consequence. When surplus disappears, every action carries weight. The body responds by reducing variability. Movement patterns become familiar. Routines become rigid. Novelty feels risky. This rigidity is often criticized, but it is adaptive. Familiar patterns cost less energy and carry fewer unknowns. This adaptation appears across all systems. Cognitive habits narrow. Emotional responses simplify. Physical routines repeat. The body favors what it knows it can sustain. What feels like stagnation is actually efficiency under constraint. Constraint also explains why recovery changes character. Early recovery restores capacity. Later recovery restores usability. The goal shifts from returning to peak to remaining functional. This shift is subtle but profound. It marks the moment when the body stops investing in growth and commits fully to maintenance. Maintenance, however, is never perfect. It preserves function by sacrificing detail. Complex endurance fades before basic stamina. Precision yields to reliability. The system chooses what keeps it alive, not what keeps it impressive. Impressiveness was never a biological requirement. This reality conflicts sharply with modern ideals. Modern culture equates worth with performance. When performance declines, worth feels threatened. But the body does not operate on worth. It operates on thresholds. As long as thresholds are met, the system continues. Adjustment is constant, but its direction is one way. Once certain capacities are released, they are rarely reclaimed. This irreversibility is not punishment. It is the cost of adaptation. Adaptation optimizes for present conditions, not for restoring the past. This is why nostalgia for earlier bodily states is so common. People remember how their body used to respond and assume that states should be recoverable. But recoverability was never guaranteed. The earlier state existed because conditions allowed it, not because it was permanent. When conditions change, states change. The most difficult aspect of this process is that it lacks clear milestones. There is no single moment when the body officially transitions from resilience to conservation. The shift happens gradually, unevenly, and often without clear markers. People only recognize it in hindsight, when patterns have already settled. This delayed recognition fuels frustration. People feel they missed a chance to intervene. But there was no single intervention point. The process was continuous from the start. Intervention could slow it, shape it, but never stop it. This returns again to the central truth. The human body breaks down easily because breakdown is not an interruption. It follows the same rules that govern development, adaptation, and survival. The only difference is direction. Development adds capacity. Breakdown redistributes it. Redistribution is often misunderstood as loss. But redistribution keeps the system viable when addition is no longer possible. It is the body's way of remaining coherent under time. Coherence matters more than completeness. A coherent system functions. A complete one may not. This is why late-stage decline often feels internally consistent, even when externally limiting. The body settles into a narrower but stable pattern. It resists disruption. It prioritizes predictability. What it loses in range, it gains in reliability. Reliability is survival's final form. From this perspective, the body's breakdown is not a failure of biology, but a fulfillment of it. The system does exactly what it was shaped to do when faced with extended time and accumulated cost. It simplifies. It stabilizes. It persists as long as possible within its constraints. The discomfort arises not from the process itself, but from the expectations placed upon it. Expectations of endless improvement, expectations of control, expectations that a body shaped by scarcity should thrive indefinitely in abundance. Those expectations are understandable, but they are not biological. Biology does not aim for perfection. It aims for continuity. Once continuity is threatened by complexity, complexity is reduced. Once capacity threatens stability, capacity is limited. The body chooses survival over satisfaction every time. This choice is not conscious, it is structural. Understanding this structure dissolves many modern anxieties about decline. It removes the need to assign blame. It reframes symptoms as signals rather than verdicts. It clarifies why even the most disciplined bodies eventually encounter the same narrowing. Discipline changes the path, not the destination. The destination was always implied by the design, a design optimized for response, not endurance, for adaptability, not permanence, for enough time, not all time. The human body breaks down easily because it is not built to resist time. It is built to move through it efficiently, then yield when efficiency no longer serves. Yielding is not defeat. It is completion of function. This completion does not negate the value of the body's earlier performance. It confirms it. The body carried out its task remarkably well. It adapted. It survived. It allowed continuity of life beyond itself. What comes after is not error. It is aftermath. And when viewed this way, the entire arc of bodily decline aligns with the same principle that shaped its beginning. A system doing exactly what it was built to do, even when the outcome no longer matches modern hopes. The body does not promise more than it can deliver. It delivers exactly what it was designed for, and no more. That aftermath is often misunderstood as decline without purpose. But biology does not operate without purpose. Purpose simply changes when expansion is no longer efficient. Early in life, purpose is accumulation. Muscle, skill, resilience, adaptability. Later, purpose becomes filtration, deciding what remains essential and what can be released without threatening survival. This filtration process explains why the body seems to simplify with time. Complexity is expensive. It requires coordination, repair, and constant adjustment. When resources tighten, complexity becomes a liability. The body responds by reducing degrees of freedom. Movements become more economical. Patterns repeat. Variability decreases. This is not stagnation, it is cost control. Cost control is the dominant theme of late biological life. Every system participates in it. The endocrine system narrows its signaling range. The nervous system dampens sensitivity to avoid overload. The musculoskeletal system favors stability over range. Even perception changes, filtering information more aggressively. The world feels smaller not because the mind has changed, but because the body no longer supports the same bandwidth of interaction. Bandwidth is a biological luxury. When bandwidth narrows, experience narrows with it. This is often experienced emotionally as loss, but structurally it is coherence. The body is maintaining a stable operating range under constraint. It is choosing predictability over possibility. Possibility requires surplus. Surplus disappears with time. This is why decline often coincides with a sense of finality. People feel that doors are closing. From a biological perspective, those doors were never meant to remain open indefinitely. They existed to allow exploration, learning, and reproduction. Once those goals are complete, maintaining open-ended possibility offers little survival advantage. The system does not mourn this change. It simply adapts. Adaptation at this stage is conservative. It avoids novelty. It minimizes risk. It favors routines that have already proven sustainable. This conservatism is often framed as resistance to change, but it is more accurate to see it as refinement. The body refines its behavior to match its remaining capacity. Capacity defines behavior, not desire. This distinction matters because it reframes frustration. Many people feel betrayed by a body that no longer responds to intention. They still want to act, move, and perform as before, but the body resists. This resistance is not disobedience. It is feedback. The system is signaling that intention has exceeded capacity. In earlier life, intention could override feedback. The body had enough margin to absorb the cost. Later, feedback becomes non-negotiable. Pain, fatigue, and limitation enforce boundaries that intention alone cannot cross. These boundaries are protective. Protection becomes the body's final directive. Protect remaining function. Protect core systems. Protect coherence. Everything else becomes secondary. This is why decline rarely affects all systems equally. Some are shielded longer than others. The body sacrifices what it can to preserve what it must. This sacrifice is strategic, not random. From the outside, it appears as fragility. From the inside, it is triage. The body is managing scarcity with the same logic it always used, only now the scarcity is internal rather than environmental. Scarcity has always shaped human biology. Early humans faced scarcity of food, safety, and time. Modern humans face scarcity of margin. Margin is the difference between demand and capacity. When margin is high, life feels easy. When margin shrinks, life feels heavy. The body's experience of heaviness is not psychological. It is structural. Structure determines sensation. This is why decline cannot be solved through mindset alone. Mindset can alter perception, but it cannot restore margin. Margin is created by structure, repair, and redundancy, all of which diminish over time. The body does not run out of will. It runs out of slack. Slack is what allowed mistakes to be forgiven. When slack disappears, consequences arrive immediately. The body becomes exact. Exactness feels unforgiving, but it is accurate. It reflects the true cost of actions that were previously subsidized by surplus. This accuracy often feels cruel because it contrasts sharply with earlier freedom. But accuracy is simply honesty without buffer. Honesty defines late-stage biological function. At this point, the original question can be answered with full clarity. The human body breaks down easily not because it is weak, but because it is transparent. It reveals its constraints as soon as it can no longer afford to hide them. Many systems in nature conceal fragility through redundancy. The human body does this early in life. Later, redundancy is spent. What remains is exposed. Exposure feels like breakdown, but it is simply the end of concealment. Concealment was never meant to be permanent. The body was always moving toward this state, even when growth dominated perception. Growth and decline are not opposites. They are phases of the same trajectory. One accumulates capacity. The other allocates what remains. Allocation continues until it can no longer maintain coherence. When coherence fails, life ends. That endpoint is not a failure of maintenance. It is the conclusion implied by the design. The body does not resist this conclusion. It prepares for it gradually. It slows. It simplifies. It stabilizes. These are not signs of giving up. They are signs of completion. Completion is the final biological success. When viewed through this lens, the question of why the body breaks down easily loses its emotional charge. The body does not break down easily. It breaks down honestly, according to rules that were never hidden, only ignored. Modern life extends time, but it does not alter those rules. It gives the body the chance to reveal every compromise it carries. What feels like fragility is simply the cost of seeing the full arc, and that arc has always been finite. As the narrative slows, the body's behavior becomes easier to misinterpret. Slowness is often labeled as decline, but slowness is also a form of control. When systems can no longer afford rapid shifts, they reduce speed to preserve accuracy. Accuracy matters more than speed when margin is thin. A fast system with no margin fails catastrophically. A slow system with precision survives longer. This is why reactions slow with time. Reflexes lengthen. Decisions take longer. Movements become measured. These changes are not evidence of deterioration alone. They are evidence of recalibration. The body is trading velocity for reliability. In a constrained system, reliability is the only sustainable currency. Reliability demands predictability. Predictability demands routine. Routine reduces variance. Reduced variance lowers risk. This cascade explains why later bodily function often feels repetitive. The body repeats what works because novelty is expensive. Novelty requires error tolerance. Error tolerance requires margin. When margin is gone, novelty becomes threat. Threat detection becomes conservative. The nervous system flags more inputs as costly. Sensitivity increases not because the system is fragile, but because it can no longer afford mistakes. What once passed unnoticed now registers as strain. This heightened awareness is often described as hypersensitivity. In reality, it is accounting without buffer. Accounting without buffer feels harsh. This harshness is why decline feels emotionally heavier than earlier effort. Earlier effort was subsidized by resilience. Later effort is paid in full. The body stops offering credit. Every action is settled immediately. Fatigue arrives sooner. Recovery demands more time. The system enforces balance because imbalance is no longer survivable. Balance, at this stage, is narrow. It exists within tight boundaries that cannot be exceeded without consequence. People often describe this as feeling boxed in. That description is accurate. The box is not imposed externally. It is the remaining safe operating space of the system. Operating space shrinks as components wear. Wear is cumulative and irreversible. Replacement is partial. Compensation is finite. These facts do not change with awareness. Awareness only makes them clearer. Clarity, paradoxically, increases as options decrease. This clarity explains why many people report a sharper sense of priority later in life. With fewer resources, the system becomes selective. It cannot support diffuse attention. It concentrates on what matters most to continued function. This concentration is not wisdom bestowed by age. It is biological triage shaping cognition and behavior. Triage operates everywhere. It determines which pains are tolerated and which trigger rest, which efforts are pursued and which are avoided, which relationships are maintained and which fade. The body influences these decisions by altering cost. What becomes too costly is released. Release is not loss in biological terms. It is efficiency. Efficiency ensures survival when abundance is gone. The body learned this rule long before modern life. It applied it to famine, injury, and danger. Now it applies it to time. Time is the final scarcity. As time becomes scarce, the body responds the only way it knows how. It reduces exposure, it limits expenditure, it simplifies structure. These responses feel passive, but they are active strategies. They are the body doing its work under constraint. This is why decline often coincides with an urge to simplify life. Less activity, fewer commitments, narrower focus. This urge is not psychological preference alone. It is physiological alignment. The body is signaling what it can sustain. The mind follows because resisting costs too much. Cost sensitivity defines the late arc of bodily function. Once cost sensitivity dominates, the body's message becomes consistent. Do less, but do it reliably. Move less, but move safely. These are not failures of ambition. They are instructions for continuity. Continuity, again, is the core value. When continuity becomes fragile, the system cannot tolerate excess. Excess becomes threat rather than advantage. This inversion is difficult to accept because modern narratives celebrate excess as opportunity. Biology sees excess as load. When load exceeds capacity, the system responds by reducing intake, output, or both. This response explains why appetite often changes, why tolerance for stimulation drops, why quiet becomes preferable. The body is managing input to match output capacity. It is balancing equations that can no longer tolerate imbalance. Balance is not comfort. Balance is survival. This reframes the emotional experience of decline. What feels like the body withdrawing is the body protecting itself. What feels like narrowing is the body stabilizing. What feels like loss is the body releasing what it cannot carry. Release happens gradually, then decisively. Gradually as margin erodes. Decisively when thresholds are crossed. Thresholds are invisible until crossed. Once crossed, there is no return. The system reorganizes around the new boundary. Boundaries are not punishments. They are definitions. Definitions clarify what is possible. They remove ambiguity. When possibilities narrow, certainty increases. The body becomes certain about what it can and cannot do. This certainty reduces internal conflict. The system stops attempting what will fail. It stops paying costs it cannot recover. Recovery becomes precious. Time spent recovering increases because recovery is no longer optional. Without recovery, function collapses. The body enforces rest not as comfort, but as necessity. Rest is no longer restorative luxury. It is structural requirement. This shift is often resisted until it cannot be ignored. Resistance accelerates cost. Acceptance reduces friction. This does not change the outcome, but it changes the experience. When actions align with capacity, the system stabilizes. When actions exceed capacity, breakdown accelerates. Acceleration is what people fear most. They fear the sudden drop. But acceleration is simply the point where compensation ends. The slope was always there. It becomes visible when support disappears. Visibility is the final theme. The body breaks down easily because it becomes visible to itself. Early life hides structure behind performance. Later life reveals structure as performance fades. What remains is the skeleton of the system's logic. That logic is simple. Survive first. Adapt next. Conserve when adaptation costs too much. Release when conservation fails. There is no betrayal in this sequence. There is no surprise, only recognition. Recognition arrives slowly, then completely. And once recognized, the question of why the body breaks down easily no longer demands blame or solution. It demands understanding. Understanding does not stop time. It aligns expectation with design. And alignment, even without improvement, reduces strain. That reduction of strain marks a subtle turning point in the body's relationship with time. Earlier, time felt like something to outrun. Later, it feels like something to manage. Management replaces resistance. The system no longer tries to overcome limits. It works within them. This shift is not resignation. It is optimization under constraint. Optimization at this stage is quiet. It does not increase capacity. It increases coherence. Coherence means fewer internal conflicts, fewer competing demands, fewer wasted signals. The body aligns its systems toward a narrower set of goals and abandons anything that interferes with them. From the outside, this looks like slowing down. From the inside, it feels like stabilization. Stabilization becomes the body's highest priority because instability is now dangerous. Early instability was useful. It allowed exploration, learning, and rapid change. Late instability threatens collapse. The same trait that once enabled growth now creates risk. The body responds by dampening fluctuations wherever possible. This damping appears in many forms. Emotional responses flatten. Physiological swings narrow. The nervous system becomes less reactive. The body prefers predictability because predictability conserves energy. Energy conservation is no longer optional. It is the condition for continuation. Continuation, again, is the central value. This value explains why the body often resists aggressive interventions later in life. Treatments that impose large changes, even beneficial ones, can destabilize fragile balances. The system evaluates not just potential gain, but risk to coherence. Sometimes it accepts inefficiency over disruption. Sometimes it tolerates discomfort over instability. These choices are not irrational. They are consistent with the body's primary objective. The objective has never changed. Only the context has. Context determines which strategies are viable. In a short life, aggressive strategies pay off. In a long one, they accumulate cost. The body learns this through experience. Experience is stored not as memory, but as structure. Structures change. Flexibility reduces. Options narrow. Narrowing options is often described as rigidity, but rigidity can be protective. Flexible systems break easily under sustained load. Rigid systems endure by limiting movement. The body becomes more rigid where flexibility would be too expensive. This is not uniform. Some areas stiffen early. Others remain flexible longer. The pattern reflects use, load, and historical compromise. Compromise is the body's native language. Every biological system is a compromise between competing demands: speed versus accuracy, strength versus efficiency, flexibility versus stability. Early in life, the balance favors speed, strength, and flexibility. Later, it favors accuracy, efficiency, and stability. The shift is not arbitrary. It follows the same logic across species and systems. What differs is visibility. Humans notice the shift because they live long enough to feel it. Many organisms do not. Their lives end before compromise becomes conscious. Human longevity exposes compromise as experience. Experience creates narrative. Narrative creates expectation. Expectation creates disappointment when the body follows biology rather than story. Stories of perpetual improvement conflict with a body built on trade-offs. When improvement slows or reverses, people feel misled. But the body never promised improvement. It promised sufficiency, enough strength to act, enough repair to recover, enough time to reproduce. Everything beyond that is borrowed time. Borrowed time feels generous until repayment begins. Repayment is not dramatic. It is incremental. It shows up as slower mornings, longer recoveries, narrower tolerance. Each sign is small. Together, they form a pattern that is hard to ignore. The pattern does not point to a single failure. It points to exhaustion of surplus. Surplus is the hidden currency of early life. When surplus is high, mistakes are cheap. Overuse is forgiven. Stress dissipates. When surplus is gone, every action has cost. The body begins to charge interest. Interest compounds. What once cost little now costs much. This is why the same behaviors feel different at different ages. The behaviors did not change. The exchange rate did. This exchange rate shift explains why advice often fails. Advice assumes a constant cost structure. Biology does not offer one. Costs rise as margin falls. What was once reasonable becomes unsustainable. The body enforces the new terms regardless of intention. Enforcement is not punishment, it is accounting. Accounting ensures that the system does not exceed what it can support. When limits are exceeded, failure is catastrophic. The body avoids catastrophe by imposing smaller failures earlier. Pain instead of rupture, fatigue instead of collapse, restriction instead of shutdown. These are protective failures. They prevent worse outcomes. Protective failure is often misunderstood as weakness. It is strength expressed differently. The system is strong enough to stop itself before it breaks completely. This self-limitation is adaptive. It preserves continuity at the cost of performance. Performance, again, is optional. Continuity is not. Understanding this reframes the meaning of breakdown. Breakdown is not the absence of control. It is control applied in a narrower domain. The body controls for survival, not for experience. When experience conflicts with survival, experience is reduced. Reduction feels like loss because earlier life equated more with better. Biology equates enough with optimal. Once enough is reached, additional capacity offers diminishing returns. When costs rise, those returns disappear entirely. This is why later life often involves simplification beyond the body. Lives become simpler. Routines stabilize, priorities narrow. The body influences these choices by changing what is tolerable. The mind adapts because resistance is exhausting. Exhaustion signals misalignment. Alignment restores efficiency. Efficiency reduces strain. Reduced strain prolongs function. This loop becomes the dominant pattern. The body guides behavior toward what it can sustain. The mind follows because survival depends on it. At this point, the original question resolves itself. The human body breaks down easily because it is designed to reveal its limits once they matter. It does not hide them indefinitely. It does not protect illusion at the expense of function. It exposes reality when exposure is safer than concealment. Concealment was useful early. Exposure is useful later. Early life hides compromise behind performance. Later life reveals compromise to prevent collapse. Both phases serve the same objective. Keep the system running as long as possible under changing conditions. This objective has guided every adjustment, every constraint, every narrowing described so far. It explains why decline feels patterned rather than random. It explains why effort eventually yields diminishing returns. It explains why acceptance reduces friction even when it does not change outcome. Acceptance aligns expectation with design. Design was never infinite. It was never meant to be. The body does not break down easily by its own standards. It breaks down precisely when concealment ends and accounting begins. And accounting, once begun, does not reverse. It continues until the system reaches equilibrium it can no longer maintain. That endpoint is not sudden. It is prepared for gradually, through every restriction, every simplification, every release. What appears as breakdown is the final expression of a long, consistent logic, a logic that never promised more than it could deliver. That long, consistent logic becomes almost invisible once the body settles fully into conservation. At this stage, change no longer announces itself loudly. It becomes subtle, incremental, and repetitive. The same sensations recur, the same limitations reappear. What once felt like progression now feels like maintenance. The system is no longer exploring, it is sustaining. Sustaining requires predictability. Predictability requires reducing variables. This is why the body begins to resist environments, routines, or demands that introduce uncertainty. Uncertainty increases cost. Cost threatens stability. The body reacts by tightening its acceptable range. What lies outside that range is experienced as discomfort, stress, or fatigue. This reaction is often misunderstood as intolerance. In reality, it is calibration. The body is calibrating itself to the narrowest range it can reliably survive within. That range becomes the new normal. Anything beyond it is flagged as unsafe. Safety, at this point, outweighs capability. Capability once allowed the body to expand into the world. Safety now allows it to remain intact within it. The shift from capability to safety is gradual, but once complete, it defines nearly every bodily response. Movement is chosen for stability, not expression. Effort is measured by recoverability, not achievement. The body stops asking, "Can this be done?" and begins asking, "Can this be sustained?" Sustainability replaces ambition. This replacement explains why the body often appears stubborn later in life. It resists pushing. It resists acceleration. It resists novelty. This resistance is not psychological reluctance. It is physiological boundary enforcement. The system has learned through accumulation that exceeding certain thresholds produces damage it can no longer repair efficiently. Repair efficiency declines because repair itself was never meant to be endless. Every repair cycle alters structure slightly. Perfect restoration is rare. Over time, repaired structures diverge further from their original form. Function returns, but fidelity does not. The body becomes a patchwork of solutions rather than a single coherent design. Patchwork systems are functional, but fragile under change. Fragility under change explains why even positive changes can destabilize later bodies. New routines, new environments, new stresses may offer benefits, but they also demand adaptation. Adaptation costs energy and margin. When margin is scarce, adaptation becomes risky. The body weighs potential benefit against potential destabilization, and often chooses the latter to avoid collapse. Collapse is the one outcome the system consistently avoids. This avoidance clarifies many late-stage patterns that appear contradictory. The body may tolerate ongoing discomfort rather than risk a major intervention. It may accept reduced function rather than attempt aggressive recovery. These choices are not irrational. They reflect a system prioritizing continuity over optimization. Optimization belongs to systems with surplus. When surplus disappears, optimization gives way to preservation. Preservation is conservative. It favors what is known. It avoids what is uncertain. It reduces exposure. These behaviors are often interpreted as decline in courage or adaptability, but they are better understood as cost-aware decision-making encoded into physiology. Physiology, at this point, drives behavior more strongly than intention. Intention still exists, but it must negotiate with structure. When structure cannot support intention, intention is overridden. This override is experienced as fatigue, pain, or inability. These sensations are not failures of will, they are enforcement mechanisms. Enforcement ensures that the system does not exceed its safe operating limits. Safe operating limits shrink because cumulative wear cannot be undone. The body does not regenerate fully, it compensates. Compensation requires trade-offs. Trade-offs accumulate. Eventually, there is nothing left to trade without threatening core function. Core function remains protected longest. Breathing, circulation, basic cognition. Everything else is secondary. This hierarchy has always existed. It becomes visible only when resources tighten. Visibility is the defining feature of this phase. Earlier phases hid hierarchy behind abundance. Later phases reveal hierarchy because abundance is gone. The body becomes explicit about what matters. It enforces priorities without negotiation. What feels like rigidity is clarity. Clarity can feel harsh because it contradicts expectation. Expectation assumes that effort should yield proportional reward. Biology does not operate proportionally. It operates within thresholds. Once thresholds are crossed, effort no longer scales outcome. This non-linearity explains why people feel confused by decline. They do the same things and receive different results. The explanation is not mysterious. The system has crossed into a different operating regime. The rules have changed because the conditions have changed. Conditions always dictate rules. This is why advice that worked earlier often fails later. The advice was never universal. The body enforces the new rules regardless of habit or belief. Belief does not alter structure. Structure dictates what is possible, what is costly, and what is forbidden. When structure changes, possibility changes with it. The body does not negotiate with nostalgia. It responds to present constraints. Present constraints are shaped by history. Every injury, illness, stressor, and adaptation leaves a trace. These traces accumulate into structure. Structure determines capacity. Capacity determines behavior. Behavior feeds back into structure. This loop continues until it can no longer sustain itself. When sustainability ends, the system simplifies further. Complexity is shed. Options close. The body becomes increasingly conservative. This conservatism is often misread as decline accelerating. In reality, it is decline stabilizing around a narrower equilibrium. Equilibrium is not comfort. It is balance under constraint. Once equilibrium is reached, change slows again. The body resists further loss by resisting change itself. This resistance can create long plateaus where function remains relatively stable at a lower level. These plateaus are often mistaken for recovery. They are not recovery. They are stabilization. Stabilization is the final success of a finite system. The body does not aim to reverse decline. It aims to prevent collapse. As long as collapse is avoided, the system considers itself successful. Pain, limitation, and restriction are acceptable costs. Acceptable to biology, not to expectation. This difference between biological success and experiential satisfaction lies at the heart of the discomfort surrounding aging and breakdown. People judge the body by experience. The body judges itself by survival. These judgments diverge as time extends. The body remains loyal to its criteria. Once this loyalty is recognized, the central question can finally be answered without tension. The human body breaks down easily because it never agreed to the standards it is now measured against. It was designed to function, adapt, and persist within a limited window. When that window is extended, breakdown is not an error. It is disclosure. Disclosure of limits. Disclosure of trade-offs. Disclosure of the true cost of time. Time reveals what design conceals early on, and once revealed, those limits do not demand correction. They demand recognition. Recognition aligns expectation with structure. Alignment reduces internal conflict. Conflict drains energy. Reduced conflict preserves what remains. Preservation, at the end, is the only remaining task. The body carries it out with consistency, restraint, and honesty. Even when that honesty feels uncomfortable to those who expected something different. That is not weakness. That is fidelity to design. That fidelity to design becomes most apparent when nothing dramatic is happening. There is no crisis, no illness, no single moment of failure. The body simply continues, day after day, within a narrower range. This ordinariness is often mistaken for stagnation, but it is actually the body's preferred state under constraint. Escalation requires reserve. Reserve has been spent. When reserve is gone, the body avoids extremes. Extremes create demand spikes. Demand spikes threaten coherence. Coherence is now the most valuable asset. Without coherence, systems fall out of sync and recovery becomes impossible. The body protects coherence by flattening peaks and filling valleys. Experience becomes more even, but also less intense. Intensity is costly. This is why later bodily experience often feels muted. Pleasure is quieter. Discomfort is duller but persistent. Sensations lose sharp edges. This is not emotional failure. It is physiological smoothing. The nervous system reduces contrast to prevent overload. High contrast requires fast recovery. Fast recovery is no longer guaranteed. Guarantees disappear as time accumulates. Earlier in life, the body behaves as if recovery is guaranteed. Later, it behaves as if recovery is conditional. Conditional recovery changes everything. Every action is evaluated not just by immediate effect, but by delayed cost. The body becomes forward-looking in a different way. It does not plan for growth. It plans for avoidance of irreversible damage. Irreversibility is the final constraint. Once certain thresholds are crossed, return is impossible. The body learns this through structure, not awareness. Structures that fail do not fully regenerate. Systems that lose redundancy do not regain it. The body responds by preventing further irreversible losses wherever possible. This prevention looks like caution. It looks like hesitation. It looks like refusal. In reality, it is precision. The body has learned which paths lead to dead ends. It simply stops taking them. Stopping is adaptive. Adaptation does not always add. Sometimes it subtracts. Removing risky options improves overall survival odds. The body narrows its behavioral repertoire to what has proven safe. This narrowing feels restrictive because it is, but restriction preserves continuity. Continuity again overrides all other values. This is why late-stage bodily function often feels repetitive. The same movements, the same routines, the same rhythms. Repetition reduces uncertainty. Uncertainty increases cost. Cost threatens survival. The logic is consistent and relentless. Relentless does not mean aggressive. It means persistent. Persistence is quiet. It does not announce itself. It does not demand attention. It simply continues. This quiet persistence is what many people experience as the background hum of later life. Nothing is wrong enough to fix. Nothing is right enough to expand. The system holds steady within its limits. Holding steady is the final form of strength. Strength earlier meant capacity. Strength now means restraint, the ability to not exceed what can be recovered from. This restraint is often misinterpreted as weakness because modern culture associates strength with output. Biology associates strength with survival. Survival prefers restraint. This preference explains why the body sometimes rejects solutions that appear rational from the outside. Aggressive training, drastic interventions, constant optimization. These approaches assume a system that can absorb shocks. The body knows it can no longer do so safely. It rejects the premise, not the intention. Rejection is protective feedback. Feedback becomes increasingly binary. Earlier feedback was graded. Small signals nudged behavior. Later feedback is firmer. Pain replaces discomfort. Fatigue replaces tiredness. Limits become non-negotiable. The body enforces boundaries because negotiation has failed too many times. This enforcement can feel abrupt, but it is built on a long history of ignored signals. The body escalates feedback only when softer signals no longer produce change. Escalation is a last resort, not a first response. Again, no malice is involved, only accounting. Accounting tallies cost over time. It does not forget. It does not forgive. It integrates every action into structure. Structure then dictates future possibility. This feedback loop tightens as margin shrinks. The future becomes more constrained by the past. This constraint is what people feel as being stuck in their bodies. They are not stuck. They are aligned with accumulated history. The body is carrying everything it has been through. It cannot discard that history. It can only work with it. Working with history means accepting asymmetry. Some systems fail earlier. Others persist longer. There is no fairness in distribution, only consistency of rule. Use shapes where. Stress shapes response. Repair shapes resilience. Everything leaves a mark. Marks accumulate into identity. Not identity as personality, but identity as structure. The body becomes uniquely itself through accumulation. Two bodies of the same age are never the same because their histories differ, but all bodies converge toward the same pattern: narrowing, conservation, simplification. This convergence explains why late-stage decline looks similar across individuals, despite different lifestyles. The surface details vary. The underlying logic does not. Everyone eventually meets the same constraints because everyone is built on the same temporary architecture. Temporary does not mean poorly made. It means purpose-built for a specific window. That window has been extended artificially by safety, medicine, and abundance. The extension reveals edges that were never meant to be hidden for this long. The body responds by managing exposure rather than pretending the edges do not exist. Pretending would be fatal. Management keeps the system viable. It reduces risk. It lowers demand. It sacrifices possibility to protect continuity. These sacrifices feel heavy because modern narratives promise endless potential. Biology offers conditional survival. Conditional survival is honest survival. This honesty is uncomfortable because it strips away illusion. Illusion made early life feel open-ended. Reality makes later life feel bounded. But bounded does not mean meaningless. It means defined. Definition brings clarity. Clarity reduces wasted effort. Reduced wasted effort preserves energy. Preserved energy prolongs function. The body follows this logic without exception. Following logic is not cold, it is efficient. Efficiency is the through line from beginning to end. Early efficiency meant rapid growth and adaptation. Late efficiency means careful conservation and release. The direction changes. The principle does not. This continuity of principle answers the central question one final time. The human body breaks down easily, not because it is fragile, but because it is efficient across time. It does not waste energy maintaining what no longer serves survival. It does not preserve capacity for its own sake. It allocates resources where they matter most. Given current constraints, when judged by comfort or performance, this appears as breakdown. When judged by survival, it is success. The conflict arises from judging the body by the wrong metric. Once the metric is corrected, the pattern becomes clear. The body does not betray, it completes. It follows through on the logic embedded in it from the beginning. It adapts, then conserves, then releases. Release is not disappearance. It is reduction to essentials. Essentials are enough, and that is why the body continues as long as it does, even as it lets go of so much along the way. As the body settles deeper into this phase, time itself begins to feel different, not faster or slower in a dramatic sense, but flatter. Days resemble one another. Sensations repeat. The edges of experience soften. This flattening is not boredom imposed from outside. It is the body reducing contrast to conserve energy. High contrast demands high responsiveness. Low contrast allows steadiness. Steadiness is now more valuable than stimulation. Stimulation requires rapid adjustment. Adjustment requires margin. When margin is thin, stimulation becomes costly. The body responds by dampening novelty and amplifying familiarity. Familiar patterns are predictable. Predictability lowers error. Lower error protects coherence. The chain is simple and unavoidable. This is why environments that once felt neutral can later feel overwhelming. Noise, crowds, constant input. None of these are new. What is new is the body's reduced capacity to buffer them. The buffer was always temporary. It has simply been used. Used buffers are not replenished. They are replaced with boundaries. Boundaries feel restrictive because they are. but boundaries prevent collapse. Without them, the system would attempt to operate as it once did and fail catastrophically. The body chooses smaller failures early to avoid terminal ones later. This choice underlies many late-stage adaptations: reduced range of motion, reduced tolerance for disruption, reduced appetite for risk. These are not signs of fear, they are signs of calculation. The system is calculating cost with greater accuracy because cost can no longer be absorbed. Accuracy replaces optimism. Optimism belongs to systems with surplus. Surplus allows mistakes to be written off. When surplus is gone, optimism becomes dangerous. The body responds by becoming conservative. Conservatism is not negativity, it is survival mathematics. This mathematics explains why the body often resists acceleration, even when acceleration seems beneficial. Faster is not better if recovery cannot keep pace. Stronger is not better if joints cannot tolerate load. More is not better if maintenance exceeds capacity. The body evaluates outcomes by sustainability, not by peak. Peak performance is irrelevant to survival. This irrelevance is difficult to accept because peak performance defined earlier identity. When the body stops valuing peaks, the mind feels displaced. Goals that once felt natural now feel expensive. Ambitions feel heavier. The body is not undermining purpose, it is redefining it. Redefined purpose centers on continuity. Continuity requires alignment between demand and capacity. When demand exceeds capacity, the system intervenes. Intervention appears as resistance. Resistance is often misread as failure. It is not. It is enforcement of equilibrium. Equilibrium at this stage is narrow but stable. The body prefers stable limitation over unstable potential. This preference is consistent across biological systems. Stability extends life. Potential consumes it. Consumption accelerates depletion. Depletion is the silent driver of breakdown. Not dramatic loss, but steady expenditure without full replacement. Every day, the body spends slightly more than it earns. The deficit is small, almost invisible. Over years, it becomes decisive. This slow deficit explains why decline feels disconnected from cause. There is no single error to point to. The cause is accumulation. Accumulation has no villain. It is simply arithmetic. Arithmetic does not negotiate. The body's arithmetic is relentless because it must be. Negotiation would allow overspending. Overspending would threaten coherence. Coherence is non-negotiable. When coherence is threatened, the body simplifies further. It reduces complexity in movement, in response, in engagement. Complexity costs energy to coordinate. Simplicity costs less. The system chooses the cheaper option. Cheap does not mean inferior. It means affordable. Affordability becomes the guiding principle. What can be afforded consistently is retained. What cannot is released. Release may feel like loss, but it prevents greater loss. This logic extends beyond physical systems. Emotional range narrows. Cognitive focus tightens. The body influences these shifts by changing what is physiologically tolerable. The mind adapts because resistance creates fatigue. Fatigue is the body's veto. When fatigue appears earlier and lasts longer, it is not because the system is lazy. It is because fatigue now serves a protective role. It stops behavior that would create irreversible cost. Fatigue replaces failure. Replacing failure with fatigue is adaptive. Pain serves a similar function. Pain limits movement before damage occurs. Earlier in life, pain could be ignored. Later, pain must be respected because repair is slower and margin is thin. Ignoring pain becomes dangerous. Danger changes behavior quickly. This is why later bodily awareness often increases. People feel more attuned to subtle signals. This is not heightened sensitivity for its own sake. It is forced attentiveness. The body demands monitoring because error tolerance is low. Low tolerance is not fragility. It is precision. Precision requires focus. Focus excludes distraction. Exclusion simplifies experience. Simplified experience feels narrower. Narrowness feels like decline. Decline, again, is perspective. From the body's perspective, this is refinement. It is removing what cannot be supported. It is optimizing within constraints. The result is a system that functions reliably within a smaller envelope. Envelope size shrinks because history accumulates. History is carried in tissue, in signaling pathways, in structural changes that cannot be undone. The body does not reset. It integrates. Integration makes future change more costly. Cost limits possibility. Possibility gives way to probability. Later, bodily life is governed by probability, not possibility. What is likely matters more than what is possible. The body invests in outcomes it can predict. Unpredictable outcomes are avoided because their cost cannot be estimated safely. This shift is often interpreted as loss of spontaneity. It is actually loss of insurance. Early life insured against mistakes. Later life cannot. Insurance requires surplus. Without insurance, risk must be minimized. The body minimizes risk by narrowing choice. Choice reduction feels like freedom loss. Biologically, it is safety gain. Safety keeps the system intact. Intactness is the final metric. Not comfort, not performance, not satisfaction. Intactness allows continuation. As long as the system remains intact, it succeeds by its own definition. This definition has guided every adaptation described so far. It explains why decline follows a pattern. It explains why no intervention fully stops it. It explains why acceptance reduces friction even when nothing improves. Acceptance aligns behavior with capacity. Alignment reduces internal conflict. Conflict consumes energy. Reduced energy consumption preserves function. Preservation extends continuity. Continuity, once more, is the answer. The human body breaks down easily because it is honest about cost. It does not pretend that time is free. It does not hide debt indefinitely. It reveals limits as soon as revealing them is safer than concealing them. Concealment belongs to youth. Revelation belongs to duration. Duration exposes everything. And as exposure increases, the body responds with the only strategy that has ever worked for it. Simplify. Conserve. Stabilize. Release what cannot be carried. This strategy is not tragic. It is consistent. Consistency is what allows the body to last as long as it does, even when lasting was never the original requirement. As this consistency deepens, the body's relationship with effort changes in a final, decisive way. Effort no longer expands capacity. It merely rearranges what remains. Earlier, effort built. Later, effort redistributes. This difference is subtle, but it explains why pushing harder eventually produces diminishing returns. The system is no longer adding strength or resilience. It is shifting load from one place to another. This redistribution is often invisible at first. A gain in one area quietly increases strain elsewhere. Stronger muscles increase joint load. Greater focus increases cognitive fatigue. Increased activity demands longer recovery. Nothing is free anymore. Every improvement carries a cost that must be paid somewhere else. The body allows these trades only when the exchange preserves overall coherence. Coherence is now the governing constraint. When coherence is threatened, the body intervenes quickly. It limits output. It enforces rest. It withdraws energy. These responses feel abrupt because the system no longer tolerates gradual erosion. Early in life, erosion was acceptable. There was time to compensate. Now, erosion risks collapse. The body shifts from tolerance to prevention. Prevention replaces growth. This replacement marks the end of experimentation. Experimentation requires the ability to fail safely. Safe failure requires redundancy. Redundancy has been consumed. Without redundancy, experiments become threats. The body responds by locking in patterns that have already proven survivable. Survivable becomes the higher standard. This standard explains why the body often favors habits that seem suboptimal from a performance perspective. Familiar movements, familiar foods, Familiar routines. Familiarity reduces error. Reduced error protects coherence. The system chooses what it can predict over what might improve. Prediction beats optimization. Optimization assumes slack. Slack allows overshooting. Overshooting accelerates learning. When slack is gone, overshooting is dangerous. The body abandons optimization because it cannot afford the mistakes optimization requires. Mistakes are expensive now. This expense reframes the meaning of breaking down. The body is not collapsing, it is enforcing a stricter budget. What feels like fragility is actually accounting without credit. Early life ran on credit. Late life runs on cash. Cash limits choices. Limited choices feel constraining because they are. But constraint prevents insolvency. The body avoids insolvency at all costs. Insolvency would mean systemic failure. To prevent that, the system imposes smaller failures early and often. These smaller failures are experienced as limits. Reduced endurance, reduced tolerance, reduced flexibility. Each limit protects the whole by sacrificing the part. The logic is ruthless, but effective. Effectiveness, not comfort, defines biological success. This success is often invisible because it lacks drama. There is no single event that marks the transition. The body simply stops offering margin. What once felt effortless becomes effortful. What once recovered overnight now requires days. The system has not changed direction. It has reached a different phase of the same trajectory. Trajectory matters more than moment. Moments draw attention, but trajectories determine outcome. The trajectory of a human body is set by its design. Rapid adaptation, followed by gradual constraint. Every system follows this arc. Muscles, nerves, metabolism, cognition. The details vary, but the direction does not. Direction is toward conservation. Conservation does not mean inactivity. It means selective activity. The body continues to function, but it functions within tighter bounds. It chooses reliability over range. It trades possibility for predictability. These trades feel like loss because earlier life equated possibility with vitality. Vitality changes meaning over time. Early vitality is expansion. Late vitality is stability. Both are forms of life. Only the first matches modern ideals. The second feels foreign because it contradicts cultural narratives of endless growth. Culture promises growth. Biology promises sufficiency. Sufficiency is not inspiring, but it is honest. It acknowledges limits without apology. The body operates on sufficiency because sufficiency keeps it alive. Everything beyond that is optional. Optional functions are the first to go. This is why decline often targets what once felt central: speed, strength, endurance, tolerance. These traits are expensive. They require surplus energy, intact repair systems, and wide margins. When surplus disappears, these traits become liabilities rather than assets. Liabilities are shed. Shedding is not random. It follows priority. Systems essential for basic survival persist longest. Systems associated with performance fade earlier. This ordering is consistent across individuals because it reflects universal biological priorities. Priority reveals design. Design reveals intent. The intent was never permanence. It was effectiveness within uncertainty. The body excels at that task. It adapts rapidly. It responds decisively. It conserves when needed. It releases when necessary. These behaviors appear as breakdown only when judged against expectations that were never biological. Expectation is the source of shock. When expectation aligns with design, shock dissolves. The body's behavior becomes predictable. Decline becomes legible. Not comfortable, but understandable. Understanding reduces internal resistance. Resistance wastes energy. Reduced waste preserves function. Preservation is the final objective. This objective does not ask for admiration. It does not seek meaning. It simply persists. The body persists as long as coherence can be maintained. When coherence finally fails, life ends. Not abruptly, but as the conclusion of a long, orderly process. Order is often mistaken for inevitability without agency, but agency exists within constraints. People can shape how decline unfolds, where it appears first, how sharply it is felt. What they cannot do is remove the underlying structure that makes decline unavoidable. Structure sets boundaries. Boundaries define possibility. Possibility narrows with time because boundaries tighten. This tightening is not punishment. It is completion of the system's logic. The body has done what it was built to do. It has survived long enough for its limits to matter. That is not a failure. It is fulfillment. Fulfillment does not mean satisfaction. It means the system has executed its function fully. From growth to adaptation to conservation to release. Every stage follows from the same principles. Those principles answer the question completely. The human body breaks down easily, not because it is weak, but because it is finite and honest about cost. It does not pretend that time is free. It does not offer infinite margin. It reveals limits when limits become decisive. In revealing them, it remains consistent with itself. Consistency is the deepest form of strength the body possesses, and it carries that strength quietly, all the way to the end. At this stage, even the idea of progression loses meaning. The body no longer moves toward improvement or decline as separate concepts. It moves toward equilibrium. Equilibrium is not a midpoint between strength and weakness. It is the narrow zone where the system can continue without destabilizing itself. Everything outside that zone becomes unsustainable. Sustainability replaces ambition completely. Ambition once pushed the body outward. It encouraged expansion, risk, and exploration. Now ambition is filtered through cost. The body does not ask what could be achieved, it asks what can be repeated without damage. Repetition becomes the standard, because repetition exposes true affordability. Anything that cannot be repeated safely is rejected. This rejection often feels like loss of motivation. But motivation is not disappearing. It is being overridden by structure. The body is enforcing rules that intention cannot bypass. These rules are not moral, they are mechanical. They emerge from accumulated wear and limited repair. Limited repair is the quiet center of everything described so far. Repair was always partial. Early in life, partial repair was enough because damage was small and infrequent. Later, damage accumulates faster than it can be resolved. The gap between damage and repair widens. The body adapts not by repairing more, but by demanding less. Less movement, less strain, less novelty, less exposure. Demand reduction is the final adaptive strategy. This strategy explains why the body often becomes intolerant of excess stimulation. Loud environments, long days, constant activity. These are not new challenges. What is new is the inability to recover fully afterward. Recovery time lengthens. Without sufficient recovery, damage compounds. The body avoids this by narrowing acceptable input. Narrowing input feels like withdrawal. It is actually calibration. Calibration aligns input with capacity. When alignment is achieved, symptoms stabilize. Pain plateaus. Fatigue becomes predictable. The system finds a level it can sustain. This level is rarely ideal, but it is workable. Workable is enough. Enough has always been the biological target. The frustration arises because modern life defines success differently. Modern life rewards growth, speed, and output. The body does not recognize these rewards. It recognizes load, recovery, and failure. When load exceeds recovery, failure approaches. The body responds by limiting load. This limitation is often perceived as the body holding back. In truth, it is holding itself together. Holding together becomes harder as redundancy disappears. Redundancy once allowed one system to compensate for another. As redundancy fades, compensation creates cascading strain. The body stops allowing compensation because compensation now creates more problems than it solves. This is why late-stage decline often feels like everything is connected. A small issue in one area affects others. Sleep affects pain. Pain affects mood. Mood affects energy. Energy affects movement. The web tightens because buffers are gone. Interdependence increases as independence fades. Interdependence is fragile. Fragile systems require careful handling. The body begins to handle itself carefully by enforcing restraint. This restraint is often interpreted as the body becoming unreliable. In fact, it is becoming precise. Precision reduces error. Reduced error preserves coherence. Coherence, once more, is the anchor. When coherence is maintained, the system can continue despite limitations. When coherence is lost, collapse follows quickly. The body will accept many forms of discomfort to avoid incoherence. Chronic pain, chronic fatigue, reduced function. These are tolerable if they prevent systemic failure. This tolerance is not resignation. It is prioritization. Prioritization becomes simpler with time. The hierarchy of needs clarifies. Survival first, function second, comfort last. Earlier life reversed this order because comfort was affordable. Later, life restores the original hierarchy. Restoration of hierarchy feels regressive because it contradicts expectations built during abundance. But hierarchy was always there. It was simply hidden by surplus. Surplus masked cost. Cost now reveals everything. Each action is priced accurately. The body stops subsidizing mistakes. When mistakes are no longer subsidized, behavior changes quickly. People become cautious not because they are fearful, but because fear has been replaced by knowledge encoded in sensation. Sensation becomes instruction. Pain instructs. Fatigue instructs. Limitation instructs. These signals are not meant to be eliminated entirely. They are meant to guide behavior within safe bounds. When ignored, the body escalates them. Escalation is enforcement, not punishment. This enforcement often creates a sense of finality. People feel that certain doors are closing permanently. This feeling is accurate. Some doors do close permanently because reopening them would exceed repair capacity. The body closes them deliberately to prevent irreversible damage. Deliberate closure is protective. Protection, at this stage, outweighs exploration completely. The body no longer explores because exploration risks damage that cannot be undone. It chooses known terrain. Known terrain costs less energy and carries fewer surprises. Surprises are expensive. This cost sensitivity extends into every aspect of experience. Emotional volatility decreases. Cognitive risk-taking declines. Physical experimentation fades. The body shapes the mind by shaping what feels tolerable. The mind adapts because fighting the body is exhausting. Exhaustion becomes the ultimate deterrent. When exhaustion arrives quickly, behavior changes. When recovery is slow, choices narrow. The body enforces alignment through consequence. This alignment stabilizes the system, even as it limits it. Limitation is the price of stability. Stability, however, allows continuity. Continuity allows presence. Presence does not require expansion. It requires coherence. The body supports presence by reducing what interferes with it. This reduction is not emptying. It is focusing. Focus becomes sharper because distractions are costly. The body does not have energy to spare on what does not contribute to stability. It filters aggressively. What remains feels quieter, simpler, more contained. Containment is the final operating mode. Contained systems do not seek growth. They seek persistence. Persistence does not look impressive. It looks repetitive. It looks limited. It looks slow. But it works. Working is enough. This understanding dissolves the final illusion about breakdown. The body is not deteriorating randomly. It is executing a long-planned transition from expansion to conservation. Every restriction, every narrowing, every enforced rest is part of that transition. Transition is gradual, not sudden. Sudden collapse happens only when transition is resisted too long. When signals are ignored, costs compound until coherence fails. The body prefers slow transition because it preserves function longer. Preservation, not perfection, is the goal, and that goal has guided the body from the beginning. It guided growth when growth was affordable. It guides restraint now that growth is expensive. The logic never changed. Only the conditions did. When those conditions are understood, the question of how much remains loses urgency. What matters is that the system continues to operate within its limits. Within those limits, life persists quietly, steadily, without drama. This quiet persistence is not weakness. It is the final expression of a design that was never meant to resist time, only to move through it efficiently. And it does exactly that, until it cannot anymore. As the system approaches its final balance, even the word ending becomes misleading. Nothing stops all at once. Nothing announces completion. The body does not collapse into silence. It continues doing what it has always done. Regulating, conserving, simplifying. The difference is that there is very little left to negotiate. Negotiation defined earlier life. The body negotiated with effort, with environment, with intention. It could bend rules because it had margin. At the end of this arc, negotiation ends. Rules harden. Thresholds become absolute. What can be done is done. What cannot be done no longer pretends to be possible. This firmness is often mistaken for failure. In reality, it is clarity. Clarity arrives when illusion can no longer be supported. The illusion was not that the body was infinite, but that limits were flexible. Early life teaches flexibility. Later life teaches finality. Both lessons come from the same structure, operating under different conditions. Finality is not collapse, it is resolution. Resolution means the system has reduced itself to what it can reliably maintain. Nothing extra, nothing wasteful, nothing aspirational. Only what continues to function within cost. This resolution feels stark because it contrasts so sharply with earlier abundance. But it is also stable. Stability is rare and valuable at this stage. The body values stability above all else now. Stability does not mean comfort. It means coherence. It means systems remain synchronized enough to continue. Pain can exist within stability. Fatigue can exist within stability. Limitation can exist within stability. Instability cannot. This is why the body tolerates chronic discomfort, but resists sudden change. Chronic discomfort is predictable. Sudden change threatens coherence. The body chooses the known cost over the unknown risk. Risk tolerance has vanished. Risk tolerance belonged to a time when recovery was reliable. Now recovery is conditional. Conditional recovery forces conservative strategy. Conservative strategy feels like withdrawal, but it is engagement with reality rather than fantasy. Fantasy promised endless improvement. Reality offers continuity. Continuity is quiet. It does not reward attention. It does not inspire stories of triumph. It simply persists. This persistence is the body's final achievement. It lasts longer than it was ever required to. It reveals its limits honestly. It does not pretend. Pretending would cost too much. When the body finally releases what it can no longer sustain, it does so without drama. There is no rebellion, no resistance, only gradual narrowing until even narrowing is complete. At that point, nothing more can be conserved. This moment is not experienced as a single event. It is experienced as increasing stillness. Stillness in movement, stillness in response, stillness in demand. The system settles into the smallest footprint that still qualifies as life. Life, at this scale, is minimal but real. Minimal does not mean meaningless. Meaning is not a biological variable. The body does not calculate meaning. It calculates viability. As long as viability exists, the system continues. When viability ends, it stops. This stopping is not sudden. It is prepared for across years of simplification. Every earlier restriction was a rehearsal. Every narrowed option was practice. The body trained itself to function with less so that the final transition would not be violent. Violence would waste energy. Efficiency remains until the very end. This efficiency answers the central question fully and finally. The human body breaks down easily because it never tried to be anything other than efficient. Efficient use of energy, efficient adaptation to stress, efficient release of what cannot be maintained. Efficiency is incompatible with permanence. Permanence would require infinite repair, infinite margin, infinite redundancy. None of those existed in the environment that shaped the body. The body was shaped for survival, not for eternity. It fulfilled that role extraordinarily well. Modern life extended time without extending design. The body responded by adapting until adaptation was no longer economical. Then it conserved. Then it released. At no point did it malfunction. At no point did it betray its purpose. It simply followed it to completion. The discomfort humans feel toward breakdown comes from measuring the body against expectations it never agreed to. Expectations of endless capacity. Expectations of controllable decline. Expectations that biology would bend to narrative. Biology does not bend to narrative. It follows structure. Structure dictated everything described here, from early resilience to late constraint, from growth to conservation, from possibility to sufficiency. Once perception aligns with structure, the question of why loses urgency. The answer becomes obvious. The body breaks down easily because it was never designed to hide its limits forever. It was designed to reveal them when hiding them became too costly. Revelation is not cruelty. It is honesty. Honesty allows alignment. Alignment reduces friction. Reduced friction preserves coherence. Coherence allows life to continue quietly until it no longer can. This is not tragedy. It is completion. The body does not fail at the end. It finishes. It finishes the task it was built for, to adapt, to persist, and to yield when persistence is no longer possible. No struggle, no protest. Only consistency. Consistency is the final form of strength, and in that consistency, the human body answers the question without words. It breaks down easily because it was never meant to resist time. It was meant to move through it, efficiently, honestly, and only for as long as necessary. When that necessity ends, so does the system. Not abruptly, not unfairly, just completely.